Well, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm really excited to introduce you to Somya Kaushik, who is the Associate General Counsel at NatureTech. Somya, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Diane. This is great.
Yeah, I'm really excited. It's a great topic around privacy and ethics that we're going to be talking about today as part of our digital transformation class. And I know it's an area that you have spent a lot of time in over the last couple years, helping your company really start from scratch and really develop their thoughts and their philosophy around this. It's a really wide-ranging area that I know you have a lot of experience in. So could you share a little bit of that experience that you have leading this company through AI transformation?
Yeah, I will say that it actually started with when you and I were working together at Mineral. ChatGPT came out and I would say crypto and blockchain, it really took companies and businesses by storm. And so whether you're a small company or a larger company like Tech, Mineral was sort of in this little sweet spot where we got to innovate and we got to take the progression of the technology that we were seeing and really make moves in that space faster than bigger companies. So when we started it wasn't actually like machine learning and LLMs. Those are not actually new to technology. We've been using them for a long time. And think about your social media algorithms, think about Facebook, you think about when you're shopping online and you get these targeted ads or the online behavioral advertising, they call it. Those are all algorithms. Those are all driven by a type of machine learning. So when ChatGPT came out and we were working on it with Mineral, it was different because that started to make the what we already had, machine learning, started to become more human-like. It gave it thinking power, it gave it reasoning power, and you no longer needed to have a direct input and output. It had this dynamic flow and process, so it was able to, quote unquote, think. And that's what I think made it kind of difficult to navigate because there are no rules with there are some boundaries, but technically there are no rules when it comes to things like agentic AI. And so it's been an interesting journey taking it from Mineral and coming up with the AI program there and then scaling it to Tech size where we're close to $1 billion in revenue and we've got about 3,500 employees globally. That takes the AI program to a whole different scale. And so at Tech, I took what we did at Mineral by starting the AI program with policies and contracts and things like that, and took it and expanded it and made a AI program for Tech, which we'll talk about later in depth, and then made sure that we had a good understanding about what we could do currently and where we wanted to be with AI, and really being realistic with that journey and putting together that program so that it fit that strategic outlook. It fit our security capabilities, it fit our privacy capabilities. And so I have been running with the AI program with a bunch of stakeholders from Tech and pushing forward all of the policies, the trainings, the contracting, and the privacy and security.
Oh boy, you've really been busy from you since we started all this, like you said, and it's not like the world has stood still either since ChatGPT came out. I mean, it's been rapidly changing and
Yeah.
evolving even since then. So can you tell me a little bit more about the AI program? It's just so fascinating how big it's gotten and how comprehensive it's gotten.
Yeah, so like AI and the laws that come with it, they're not all like fully baked, and people are sort of operating in the Wild West, so to speak. And so what we did was lean into a little bit of intuition, a little bit of common sense with how should we tackle this. And then we looked at some of the legislation that was coming down, like the EU AI Act. And it was my job in legal to take a look at the landscape, the legal landscape, and decide how are we going to tackle this so that we mitigate risk, mitigate litigation, but also make sure that our company can scale and grow and be, industry leaders, and our products and solutions can get out the door faster. So, looking at sort of the purpose and intent with these legislations, I realized very quickly that all of the state laws, the EU law, the crux of it comes down to ethics, privacy, data security, and it comes down to protecting the consumer or any one of us that's using these tools. So, protecting their data from being used in ways that they are not consenting and giving them rights over their data that is driving these AI tools. And so, with that understanding and with that, the purpose and intent in mind, I created an AI program and counterintuitively said that I think legal should be the driver of this AI program. And obviously, I have a stake in that opinion, but I think everyone realized quickly that that's true. And usually in many companies, it's not common for legal to be seen as a real big business partner, right? We're sort of like set on the side of an organization where it feels like it's running, and then you kind of dip into the legal to get approvals and the green light, and oh, like something big happened, let's just check in with legal. But I really wanted to make the legal function here a business partner. And so that's why I said I think the AI program should be driven by legal, and I'm happy to dive into that. I did that in 2018 when GDPR and CCPA, all the privacy legislation came down. And again, companies were really worried and they're very anxious about how to comply with them. And so I dove into the unknown. So I like to kind of dive into the unknown, and AI is the next one. So here I am driving the AI program. And what that incorporates is having a stakeholder from each part of the business that can sit at the table. And I like to have a visual where it's like legal might be the center, and then the spokes of the wheel are the other stakeholders of the organization. So we've got someone from product, from marketing, from operations. We've got somebody from security, data, and obviously legal is there too. So we've got as many as we can that are going to directly be impacted by AI regulations and compliance. And we meet on a quarterly basis. And I lead it through compliance because I think compliance, both ethically and from the legal aspect, is sort of this common thread among all of the aspects of AI. And then we have an open forum where everyone can discuss sort of updates off of the compliance discussion. And we look at the roadmap. Our product roadmap is a great time for us to look at the next even 6 month to 12 month. We're not even pushing out to 18 month because AI changes so fast. So we're doing 6 to 12 month outlooks on their product roadmap, and we get to talk about, okay, what are the challenges from a legal and AI ethics privacy standpoint. So that's how we're operating the actual committee itself, and that's the center of the AI program.
Yeah, it's really fabulous because I agree with you. I mean, it's not usual that you see legal at the center, but I think this was really smart because as you know, when we started really working with AI, that became the foremost question
Yeah,
that from our customers in particular was, what are the legal ramifications? And then again, having you at the center of it really made a lot of sense, even though it's unusual, and you
yeah,
don't always find someone in the legal part of your business who's willing to step up and
right.
lead that. But I think it was absolutely the right decision, and especially as things continue to change and evolve, it makes a lot of sense. So, the program, I think you've told me a little bit about certain buckets that you all really focus on in terms of you said you have this quarterly meeting, you'll do, but I think you mentioned that there's certain areas that you really focus on. Can you share a little bit more there?
Yeah, and I like to look at it that as a company, we've got sort of three buckets that we need to be looking at AI from, or three different lenses. And so one of them is our procurement, our vendors, or third party bucket. Then the middle one is internal. So how do our employees and the people of our business use AI, both for their own work product, but also for their own efficiency? And then the third bucket is our products and customer facing, consumer facing solutions and products. So those are the three buckets that I like to take to the committee, and also encourage everybody to look at our AI program from that lens, because one of them is always implicated when we have AI as a discussion, and sometimes multiple and or all of them. So we'll see things like our vendor and procurement and third parties program. We'd have to develop a new security and AI questionnaire so that when we're onboarding third-party tools for our company to use, let's say Zoom, or we use Zendesk or whatever it may be, or even Salesforce. Those are the tools that help us operate as a company. We call them third parties. And we need to make sure that all of those companies can operate at the standard that we feel is required for our legal and compliance and security matters. So we've drafted a questionnaire that now includes AI questions. So we're vetting the third party, that's that bucket. And then we've got the internal bucket, which is how are our employees going to feel empowered to use AI and try new tools and come up with better efficiencies and processes for their work without feeling that we're really restricted and they're restricted in what they can do because they're afraid of this unknown, right? So like Diane, we went through that whole iteration of let's start really, really strict because we don't know anything about AI and we don't, it's kind of scary because it's unfettered access and unfettered data. So that went through a whole transition of how do we make that middle bucket feel right for our company and our company's culture and the company's direction. And then the third bucket is when our product and engineering folks are going through product development and testing and pilots, bringing in legal early on to that process so that we can include and incorporate compliance, ethics, and privacy while you're building the product instead of coming to legal at the end and say, hey, legal, we have this product. We want to launch it in 60 days. Can you let us know if this is good to go? That's just not the way things work anymore because we're operating in such unknown. So I am a proponent of bringing in legal early to all three of these buckets. And those are the way we tackled those three with our AI program.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I remember bringing you early on in our first product. I mean, you were
Yeah.
in there innovating and retooling and really you were part of that development team, honestly,
Yeah.
Somya. So that was super. So you brought up that when you set up the AI program, and obviously it's evolved, that you set up AI policies and training. So could you share a little bit about what those are and what you learned along the way?
Yeah, I think that was the best learning experience in the AI setting right now for myself. We started with sort of the fear of the unknown. And I say we, it's legal. I mean, I think legal and business oftentimes have competing interests or maybe it's aligned interests, but we're not going at the same speed. So that was one example. And I like to think that I've got a business hat that I can put on from time to time and that I don't want to be like the Department of No.
Hmm.
So we started off being as restrictive as we could. You know, all the use cases of our employees had to go to legal and, engineering and data. And we would have to approve each use case. So the policy was you can't use any AI tool as an employee or even vendors or a product without having that approved. It was sort of funneled down to legal. And that felt good until it didn't, until we realized,
Yeah.
right, that the culture was feeling a little nervous about AI. It felt like it was the gatekeeping was kind of scary at some point. It didn't really foster innovation, it didn't foster excitement, and it was slowing deals down from a revenue standpoint and also onboarding new tools, having to go through this really restrictive process. So that was like the first policy we created, which was very narrow and had a lot of control. And that comes because we didn't know the space, and legal wants to try and control as many of the risk and the gaps that we can. But we slowly realized that in that arc, we've got to kind of dive in a little bit and go into these deep waters, maybe with like a little bit of a floaty instead of a boat. So then at Tech, we kind of took some steps back, but at the same time, having done it with Mineral and realizing that, okay, you've got to open the gates a little bit. You've got to empower people. People are the center of this, actually. And in many ways, then Tech kind of took our experience and they said, okay, Somya, like we are going to trust you on this and we're going to trust the learnings you had and we are going to make it a guideline. And we're not going to make it a policy. We're going to make it a guideline. And it's going to be an internal guideline for employees to realize you can do this unfettered, except for the data that you put in. That will depend. There's the restrictions and the approvals will depend on the type of data you put into these AI tools. And then our legal team has, vendor reviews, and then I am very much part of the product for the third bucket. So we went from a very strict policy, and then we went all the way to an open guideline, and it helped us foster trust in the company and made everybody realize that because there's so much trust within the senior leadership and executive leadership, people are actually coming to us more often than not saying, "Hey, I just want to make sure what I'm doing is okay." And most of the time we're like, "Yeah, thanks for coming and it's okay." When they didn't need to. So we know that instead of making it very narrow and kind of scary, and people were still going to use it, just not tell us,
Right.
we sort of opened up that dialogue and it's been really good.
That's great. I mean, I can't tell you how many companies I talked to today, Sonia, that are still in that place of very
Yeah.
restrictive, or who actually went the opposite direction, where they started with a very open policy, and then some things happened, and then they clamped it way down. So it makes a lot of sense that there was sort of an evolution of the journey there. So that's great. And then what about training? Obviously, a lot of the employees in the company had to be trained. What types of training around privacy and ethics that did you offer to the employees or even management so that they knew what to expect and how to follow the guidelines?
Yeah, so I put together off of the EU AI Act, which I think is right now operating as sort of the global gold standard for AI. And what I did was put together guidelines for our executive team and senior stakeholders that they can share with the rest of their teams. And it has a product section, it's got an engineering section, it's got legal and compliance and risk. And what it does is it outlines what we are allowed to do and what we're not allowed to do in all of those buckets. And it's been well received because it's very prescriptive in a non-prescriptive area right now. Like AI is, you can do kind of, anything at this point. And so training started off with just making sure folks knew the limits because oftentimes with a guideline and an open policy, so to speak, we people do also like to know what the rules are. So they feel a little comfortable. So we're not being really restrictive, but we're training them with here's the absolute don'ts. And if
Right.
it's not on this list, do, you know? And so the training started with sort of materials that went out to the company. And then we actually felt like the next thing to train folks on was not about like black and white. It was more about you have to understand what's confidential to the business, what's proprietary, what's sensitive information or personal information. Not a lot of folks know it, and I think just empowering them with knowledge, help them understand. Like we can use a tool, but we can't put financial data of the company in that tool, or we can't put in customer data into that tool because that is considered sensitive and we don't own it. So empowering them to understand through trainings about what is confidential, what are those classifications of data. And we did that through actual trainings and as well as documentation that folks could go to, such as an FAQ, right? We drafted something friendly, simple for folks to go look into when they had questions on their own without having to go to a stakeholder. And so we did those, and we had sort of, I go into different teams meetings and give them a kind of like a AI 101, and then I'm obviously very involved in the product development for all of our products, which at Tech now we have, I think, close to 30. And you can imagine I'm in a lot of product meetings.
Yes, absolutely. And then you mentioned legal documents. Again, probably starting from scratch, it sounded like you had to modify some of the legal contracts you already had, create new ones. Can you talk a little bit about that journey?
Yeah, so Tech is a large company and we have so many products. And over time, we've tried to unify our contracting, but it still is that almost, well, not every product, but a lot of products still have their own contracts that they're operating under. And we're in the process of unifying that. But instead of having to go in and like edit each one, which would cause so much friction with a customer and is just a very heavy lift for the legal team to do. And there was no like clean way to do that. So what we decided to do was make just an AI terms and conditions that would live online, kind of like a privacy policy would. And that would govern any product, AI product under the Tech umbrella. And so putting together that contract was an important thing for us to do from a contracting standpoint. That's where we tackle some of the larger questions that customers have, like, do you guarantee the outcome is going to be accurate of your AI solution? You know, things like that get tackled in this AI terms and conditions. And then we have some contracts that still need updating. We have like data privacy agreements or data processing agreements that customers will ask us to sign, and we'll have to go in and put in some AI language in there. So the contracting looks like that and has been working well so far.
Super. And, in terms of privacy, how do you would recommend to other companies? And I know you speak often, and in terms of kind of guiding people about what to do, how do you recommend companies approach ensuring that company and customer privacy is protected? What are some of the examples of things that you recommend they do or consider?
Yeah, I think every company has to worry about privacy and has to worry about their security, which go to me hand in hand. And, we were chatting before we started this day, and like everything revolves around data, right? Like
Yes.
in this day and age, you can't not collect data if you're a business. That is a valuable asset. And if you are collecting any type of data, that means that your privacy and security has to be considered. And it can't be low on the priority for the business objectives and things like that. It is central to the business now and more so than ever. So I would think that companies should actually start by what I like to do is like reverse engineer sometimes.
Hmm.
Actually, a lot of my life, I'm like, let's start there and work backwards because especially when you're walking into the unknown, it's kind of hard to figure out what your next step should be. So I would tell companies to look at the broader strategic plan for the company first. Like, where do you want to go in 10 years or 5 years, whatever your outlook is? What are going to be the most important business objectives? Do you want to be the number one in your industry? Do you want to have X amount of products? Or, I don't know what that metric is, but take that and then work backwards and really figure out hone in on the priorities first and then tackle that with the lens of privacy, compliance, and security. And then be really honest with what you're capable of doing. If you're a small company, you're not going to be able to be like SOC 2 compliant from a technical standpoint. And you might not have this AI committee, right? Because your committee might be your whole employee base. And then if you're a large enterprise or a publicly traded company that's large, your risks look different there too. You have a lot more to lose, and so your risk mitigation looks different. So I'd be very honest and assess the privacy and security capabilities and your current stance, and then start to understand the data that you do collect and unify that data. Make sure you've got clean data. You know what all of your data classifications are. And then you start by sort of figuring out what you currently have and then where you want to be, and you've got to bridge that gap. And then bridging that gap is all the steps I'm talking about here is okay, come up with your program, refine your contracts, come up with new data practices and retention. Um, maybe you have to revisit some of the vendors that you have and kind of going through these assessments. So I think you take it one step at a time, but be realistic with where you currently are and be realistic with where you strategically want to be. And then, the AI program is a great place to start to bridge that gap.
Super. Well, that sounds really approachable. I mean, it does feel like the way you described it, that really any company could do that. And a lot of times I think they find it very scary and how to do that, and how to approach it. So that was super. So switching gears from privacy, let's talk about ethics, because I remember that was something that we early on chatted about when we worked together in terms of that, common ethic ethical concerns that came up. What are you hearing from companies in terms of what's coming up regarding AI and ethics?
Yeah, the EU AI Act actually has a three-tiered categorization of, I think it's like no risk or low risk, medium, and then high risk. And those aren't the exact nomenclature for the categorizations, but essentially that's what they are. And they do a really good job, actually, of outlining what are things that are completely prohibited. And I think those, if you look at them, are heavily leaned towards the ethics concerns because AI can have so many different, realistic outcomes. We're seeing like things like deep fakes, right? That's a common
Yes.
thing we've heard for many years. But things even as like taking an ad and taking someone who is talking in a video and you ask AI to make that person speak a different language so that you can market it into a different jurisdiction without having to get another person to do that, right? That's a great cost saver for a company. Those have ethical concerns, right? Those have concerns in terms of disclosure. Like you'd need to let those folks know who are receiving that AI altered advertising and marketing. You'd have to let them know that this was created 100% by AI, and you can't dupe them real thinking that this is a real person, thinking that this person knows this language. There's a lot of concern about fraud, misleading consumers from a marketing perspective. Also, I see things with social scoring. So, like the EU AI Act talks a little bit about social scoring and biometrics and things like that. Social scoring is prohibited under the EU AI Act. And that's sort of things where it's a fine line, right? Like you take a Uber, and many of us take Uber all the time, and you get a score, right? You get a rating, like what's my rating and what's their rating. And so we're kind of already down this social rating and scoring, but now we are saying that's human generated, right? And that comes from your experience and your thoughts and your opinions. Those are reviews, essentially. And we've never
Right.
had a cap on, having that right to speak. But now when you have AI coming in and you're taking a bunch of data and then you're deciding, okay, maybe this person is not good to be hired because it looked at all their internet data activity and it found they posted something on LinkedIn 10 years ago. Like that, and then they're saying, oh, we wouldn't recommend you hired this person, that becomes social scoring. That becomes a place of ethical concern. Things where people may not want you to know about them. Now the data you know, can not only be accessed, but it can be sort of thought through by a machine. And so we see like prohibitions in the ethical concern area in employment settings. So like hiring and terminations, those things have to still be done by humans. And those things are important for everybody, but it's important when you come to litigation too. Those are very important places to consider ethics. So, I mean, there's so much to consider from marketing, from even the work product that you put out there, and things like your slide deck. Maybe you're doing a demo for a client, a prospective client, and it's created entirely by AI. And you do need to disclose that this was created entirely by AI, or even that one image is AI. Just like we all had to many moons ago, like cite our work in like a bibliography or a whatever it was called. We still kind of have to do that more so now when it comes to being transparent, honest, giving the right disclosures, because the ethics concerns are we don't want to dupe people. We don't want them to entering into things they thought was X and it turned out to be Y. We want to still have transparency and honesty and trust in business.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, we just talked about this in class with the students that, we're trying to lean into AI at the university. And the discussion we're having is we're actually encouraging people to use AI to supplement what they're doing. But as you described, be transparent and let us know that that was one of their sources, just like you would do a citation for anything else. That AI should be one of those citations. So being transparent is really important. I'm curious
Yep.
about your thoughts about because you brought up so many great things around ethics, around working with customers, and now you started to touch on employees. What are your thoughts around employees? I've definitely run into companies where the employees are questioning companies about the ethical use of AI at the company itself. Has that been something that you've talked about in your circles, as you in the legal world in terms of, is that a place that you all work and deal with? Is that something that you partner with HR on? I'm just curious. I know this is a left out of the left field question, but it just came up when I was thinking
No,
about it.
it's a great question. And I would say I'm lucky that it has not come up in my work with Tech. I think the sentiment that I have heard from the people that I work with is it's such a spectrum about folks who are very concerned about just AI in general, not so much how the company is using it. But there are folks who I talk to and they're like, I won't use that. Like, I don't know what that is, and I won't
Right.
use it. I won't put my data in there. And then there are people who are like, I asked ChatGPT about everything, And so it's a broad spectrum, rightfully so. And I think, the more I talk to folks outside and, do some speaking and I hear people talk about their trepidations with AI, I feel that most people are leaning towards um, hesitation and trepidation still, and that's mainly because of, I think, privacy. I will say people are very concerned about training models on their data. That's like a number one question we get from our customers and clients, which is also why we put together the AI terms and conditions. We tackle that there. Um, and ethics kind of weaves into that. I think all of AI has this like ethics and compliance thread
Mhm.
that goes through it. And I think I said this a little earlier, like you still need to use a little bit of your common sense here because the law has not caught up and it will, but it's not there yet. And so when we think about ethics, you have to have like this moral compass where you put yourself in the consumer's shoes and you realize if that were me, I wouldn't want that. If that were me, I'd want to know whatever that question is. But I think in Tech, that's how we're approaching it is it's customer first, it's people first, and thread ethics through all of the discussions. Like whether it's product development or it's how our people use it, it's got to be at the forefront is ethics and people.
Great. So there are a couple other areas that you mentioned, other kind of legal areas that you've mentioned where a lot of this comes up in terms of things like data ownership. I definitely remember while we were working together, some of our creative people who are, as you mentioned, creating ads, creating images and artwork, really had questions about, the IP around that and data ownership and whatnot. And I'm just curious, do you have an example of that you've seen that you've had to work with, whether it be copyright concerns or anything there?
Yeah, data ownership is an interesting one because, uh, the number one question we get from customers who are trying our AI products, the number one question is who owns the output? Okay, so
Mm.
that's that third bucket, like the product to the consumer side. Their number one question is who owns the output? Because I want to own the output as a customer, right? Like you're using this for your benefit, and that is sort of a twofold analysis. And the way we approach it is if the output is created off of your own data, the customer data, then you would own the output. If it's created off of company-owned data, such as content or documents or materials, then the company would own it, the output, with a license over to the customer to use.
Mm.
And that's how we've tackled that data output discussion, the ownership of that. But then internally in that middle bucket with the employees, whatever an employee creates on behalf of the business ultimately is owned by the business. And that's a concept under law. And the way we tackle that and the way we train and sort of empower folks to understand this concept is that in order for the company to retain ownership over its intellectual property or it's the outputs, whatever it may be that we're using to create a product or create work product, we need it to be created by a human or partially by a human. So right now there is litigation out there that has solidified the concept that anything created 100% by a machine, or in this case, an AI tool, if it's 100% made by a machine, you cannot claim copyright ownership over.
Mm.
And so that's a good starting point for me to advise the company that if we ever, as a company, want to own this material, then we would make sure that you can create it off of AI, but then we have to come in with our creative abilities and we have to put some kind of human authorship to it. There has to be a human element in order for us to claim some copyright ownership and have that IP protected. Otherwise, we may be creating wonderful marketing campaigns and ads and all of these assets that we want to claim as ours. But if we're using it 100% by the AI tool, we won't be able to claim ownership. And then you lose a lot of your value there.
Oh, super. That's a great distinction. And then you brought up outputs. So, we've all heard stories around inaccurate outputs or hallucinations and whatnot, and sort of, what are the indemnification implications around that? Is that something you've had to tackle?
Oh, yeah. That is, again, the interests are competing, like, as especially because these tools are ever evolving. The accuracy, it's sort of this chicken or egg. It's like the accuracy
Mhm.
increases with more data.
Right.
And people are nervous about providing more data if it's inaccurate. So you kind of like go through this whole
Yeah.
cycle. It's hard because you have to almost promise your customers, like, no, I promise you, like it's getting better.
Yeah.
And you just have to give us your data. And so it's this chicken or egg, it's sort of this catch-22 cyclical thing. And the way we sort of tackled it was we said, we're all new to this. And so we are going to provide this as is, and we're going to give you disclaimers, and we are going to disclose that this is all sort of based on how much accurate information you give us as well. And so our stance on indemnification is that we won't indemnify for inaccurate results and outcomes. Because right now everything is still being trained unless we have a human in the loop. If we have
Yeah.
someone who is reviewing all of the outputs, and some products do require that, then we can take a little bit of a looser stance on the no indemnification and we can indemnify, but there will be some caveats and exceptions to that as always.
Yeah, that sounds very logical and makes a lot of sense. Super.
Yeah.
So, you kind of described, obviously, you described this great journey where, you started here. There's lots of legal counsel that it's just starting that journey that you started a few years ago. What's your recommendation for legal counsel supporting companies as you did, as they start to really undergo AI transformation?
I think it's a time for you, it's like the time for you to shine. If you're young and you want to dive into this, this could be your moment to grab something and become an expert really quickly. There are AI, like I said in the beginning, has been around, right? We've seen machine learning, we've seen all of this in different algorithms. But this type of agentic AI, this type of thinking and processing like a human is still new and it's rapidly changing. So no one's really an expert, dare I say. And I don't think
Right.
anyone's really an expert at something that's always changing. And I think for someone who's young in their career or starting out in-house even, this is a great opportunity for you to take this topic and make it yours and build something sort of while like build a plane while you're flying it, or that's kind of how everyone is approaching it. I wouldn't think anyone else really has this solid down. I think we're all kind of doing the same thing. So one, I'd say jump in, own it, become the expert in your company about it. And then the other thing is be proactive, right? A lot of times we will not want to do it until other companies have sort of taken the step and then maybe faltered, and we've seen like, oh, let's not do that, and we're waiting for more case law as a lawyer to see how does this play out in a courtroom, or what are the fines from this authority. We're sometimes waiting, but I think my stance with Mitratech is let's be proactive. Let's be the ones that start and set the rules, because when you are given the opportunity to go in the Wild West, you also are given the opportunity to make the rules. So be proactive. And then I would say try and predict without having perfection. Obviously that's kind of like an oxymoron. You can have like a perfect prediction, but um I would say lawyers are really, we really want all the information we can get before we make a prediction or a decision. And this is the place where you will not get that. And so if you shy from uncertainty, this may not be your area, or it could be a great place to challenge yourself, but you're never going to get all the information. So you have to keep predicting over and over again. It's not like one prediction and you set it and you forget it. But, and then, that leads me to my last one is I'd say pivot. You have to be able to pivot. In order to pivot, you have to be able to predict. And so, be proactive, predict as best as you can with the information you have. Use your own ethical judgment because more often than not, that will be very valuable to the next step you need to take. And then once you have those, you can feel a little more confident in pivoting as the business changes or as the law changes. You'll have those tools with you so you don't feel too nervous about kind of being in the dark.
Well, I love how this goes back to what you said earlier about liking the position to be a partner with the business. This seems like a perfect moment. Like if you're in an organization where legal's kind of been put on the side, only consult. Like this seems like a moment where actually you can get that partnership responsibility or that role in a different way because everything is so new and you're all trying to figure out together.
Absolutely. Great
Yeah,
opportunity.
great. And then, you talked about pivoting. And so if we go bigger in sort of the legal profession, how do you see, like, are you seeing major shifts in the profession? Or do you see things, your peers struggling, and changing or expectations different? What would you say? I mean, I was just watching the news last night and they were talking about, people who are firing their, personal lawyers and trying to go to court on their own. I don't know if you saw that on the
Yeah.
national news. And so, I mean, what do you see in general for the legal profession?
Yeah. Well, I don't, I'll tell you what I think, I'll tell you what I'm seeing. I mean, I think that ultimately part of being a lawyer is also being sort of like a psychologist, like you need a human touch. Before being in-house, I was a trial attorney for 10 years, and I will say most people don't want you to tell them the law. When your clients come to you with a problem, it could be, as big as a criminal issue or it could be a business issue. Whatever it is, it's important to them. And they just want to know that you are going to take care of them. And so in the physician world, in the medical world, we call that bedside manners. You need that as a lawyer, especially in the trial arena. But I would say that in-house, it has been important too. So even though folks think that I'll fire my personal attorney and I'll just get, this legal tool that has AI to like draft my complaint and represent me in court, like I get that's all going to happen. It might be happening. But ultimately, it comes down to having that human element that is so important in the law, being able to understand and take your experience. Like one thing AI can't do is take experience that you have that's not quantifiable and bring that to the new situation that's unknown. And that's something humans can do. I've done it here. And then, being able to feel comfortable that someone knows when we have to pivot, this person knows, and I trust that person's judgment. And I want them to make that decision. So if you go to a tool for that decision, it may not have all the background that you need. You may not even have the trust you need. And I'm seeing a lot of in the legal field, I'm feeling seeing a lot of legal tech. And I just went to a conference over the summer and I saw amazing legal tech coming out to help lawyers at firms, in-house, businesses. And what I'll say is everything's still very siloed. Like each tool does one thing really great. Like here's your document creation, here's your clause extraction, and here's your time and bill management, matter management. There's no unified like way of tackling the law right now from AI. It's very siloed and piecemeal. That'll change, but I think you'll never not need a lawyer because they bring experience, they bring a human to the human element that's required for trust. And you want somebody who can also have like the human emotions, right? Like you need
Yeah.
someone who can empathize with you when things go wrong and someone who can steer you in the right way. And I think that that's a really big part of having a team that you trust with people. I think the way things are going to change a little bit are a lot of the groundwork will be done by AI, and then
Right.
lawyers are going to come in for that human element. We're going to come in for that, such as doing a trial. You can't have AI do your trial because in trial, every single hour looks different. You're analyzing the jury's reaction, you're analyzing the judge, you're swift on your feet, and there's no way AI could ever do that. They could write the brief for your lawyer. That's great, and that's already happening. But I don't think you'll ever change that representation. And the same thing in-house. I get a lot of salespeople and revenue folks in my company who will ask me to draft a section, whatever it may be, and they'll just use ChatGPT or any approved AI tool, and they'll give me the section already, and they'll say, "Can you now tackle this and make it what we need it to be?" And at first, I was kind of like, "Where did you get this clause from? Like, where did this come from?" And then I realized, no, this is good. This is good for everybody. This is good for them. And this is good for me because I can take that as a starting point and then I can
Right.
reiterate it to what we need. And then it's much faster to get that out the door. And so it's increasing efficiencies and I love it. And I encourage the legal team to do those kind of things. But I will say most of them require a lot of redrafting. It's a good starting point, but it does require a lot of redrafting.
Yeah, I think I'm an AI optimist myself, but as you described, I really feel like it's just about getting you ahead or more efficient,
Yeah.
but it still requires some discernment from the humans to
Yes.
to make the final draft from that perspective. But it definitely will get you there faster. Well, that's a great place to end.
Yeah.
Really appreciate your time, Somya, and I know the students will be really excited when you join us at class. So thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you. I look forward to meeting everyone and continuing the discussion. Thanks, Anne.
Thank you. Okay.